I can.
Okay, testing.
Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating, from the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day. Each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Well, I hope you all had an excellent Halloween, but our spooky festivities are continuing this week because we're going to be speaking with Father Sebastiaan von Houten about living the vampire life. This guy is very, very cool, and I'm so excited to have him on the show. One, to talk about vampires and the whole vampire culture. But I have, I think, some of the dumbest questions. But I think they're questions that everyone has about this whole lifestyle because it's something that most of us don't run into. So brace yourself. Anyway, but Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com, where you can find out about all the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healing, and clairvoyant readings. So if there's stuff going on in your life, give me a call. We can set up a time for a session and get things organized and straightened out. Also, it's brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And please do sign up for our weekly newsletter. You can do that at justenergyradio.com. And while you're there, you can check out our over 5 years of show archives, going on 6. And one last thing before we bring Father Sebastiaan on. My book, Man-Made, now available. You can get a copy. Find out how our mythology tells us about the time when the gods walked the earth. And who were these gods? I think they might have been extraterrestrials. But you'll have to get the book to find out. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Father Sebastiaan von Houten, and we'll get him on the air. Father Sebastiaan is a Master Fangsmith, Impresario of the Endless Night Vampire Ball, and author of I'm just not even going to try that word, Vampyre Magick, and the publisher of Vampyre Almanac. He is the world's foremost authority on vampire culture and community, having traveled the world meeting vampires throughout Europe and the USA, as well as running the Vampire Ball on Halloween in New Orleans. He has appeared on CNN, Discovery, History Channel, AM to Coast with George Norrie, NatGeo, SciFi, and in Glamour Magazine, Bloomberg News, the New York Times, and Cosmo. Boy, he really does get around. So the author of Vampire Virtues, Father Sebastiaan von Houten. Hey, Sebastiaan, how's it going?
Wonderful. I'm recovering from Halloween.
I am just so excited to have you on the show because, I work in the ghost hunting world, and, when you get in that September, October time frame, it's just crazy. And I would think that in the vampire culture, it's just as crazy around that Halloween point time.
Oh, yes. The main thing that is really interesting about the vampire and Halloween is basically that, let me put it like this. It's when we can take our masks off, and also when many people are in the spirit of being open-minded to our culture. So it's not just a cliche Halloween thing. It's more of an open mind. The whole American culture surrounds the concept of the occult and esotericism, and they always say that in ancient cultures that, October 31st and that time of year is when the veil between the spirit world and the physical world came down, and there was more of a connection between the two. So for us, that's very metaphorical. It's not just metaphysical. It's an actual time when, people are thinking about this. So that collective agreement gives us an opportunity to be more open and kind of come out of the coffin more easily.
Okay, so I have to ask this question. I'm sure you're asked all the time. So, are you a vampire, or do you consider yourself a vampire?
Well, that's a very complicated trigger question. Yes. There's first of all, let me make something extremely clear. In the vampire culture, there isn't just one vampire culture. There's so many factions and groups and perspectives and opinions and directions and philosophies and whatnot within the vampire culture. It's mind-boggling. You have different types of vampires, almost as many as there are people in the vampire community. For me in particular, and my community, the community that I'm involved in, which is known as the Sanguinarium, which means the Guild of the Blood, but it's actually Latin for that. What it means is an agreement for us. Members of the Sanguinarium have a specific agreement on what is a vampire versus other groups of vampires who have their own opinions. And we're not trying to be judgmental or, we're very open-minded. However, we're very focused on what we do. So for us, vampirism is a philosophy. It's a way of life. We look at the vampire mythology and we pick and choose what empowers us. So if you want to say, am I a vampire? Am I a Buddhist or am I a Christian or whatever? I practice vampirism as a lifestyle and a philosophy. And within our community, there's some people that take it even further and practice it as a path of spirituality and esoteric tradition. So we divide these two between what we call the day side, which is the philosophy of things, and the night side, which is the spirituality of things. And there's so many people that come into our community and just want to hang out. It's like a beautiful woman going to a gay club. They're not a gay man, but they're going to the gay club and hanging out and, having a blast, listening to the music and drinking and partying and everything like that. And we call those people black swans. They don't particularly partake in the vampire culture, but they're kind of, they hang out in it. They're part of the culture, but not part of the philosophy, in other words. So that's kind of the best description I can give. It might be a little long, but...
No, I think it's wonderful. I'm very new to this topic, which I was just so glad to get you on because you seem so well educated and well versed, not only in, what you're doing, but, in a bigger picture of the community. And I never would have considered vampirism as a spiritual path.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a lot of, the vast majority of the vampire community and media is not the type of vampire I am. I can divide vampires into three categories, maybe a fourth if you want, but these are very broad. They're not very focused. And every time that I look out there, there's a new definition for what a vampire is. And, some, group in, Alberta, Canada might pop up and say, we're maple syrup vampires. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But it's not particularly what we do. My clan is called the Sabertooth Clan, and we started in New York City on the 6th of August, 1995. And believe it or not, the first member was my mother, my birth mom.
Your mom?
My mom. But she actually came along before the clan. Clan Sabertooth is basically something interesting. I'm a fangsmith. I make custom teeth. It's like being a tattoo artist. And literally, I work in tattoo parlors. I work in the body modification industry as well as the Halloween industry. The vampire archetype is so versatile. And the Sabertooth tradition is basically that vampirism is a philosophy. And what's very interesting on how this came about was between the agreement of the people I make teeth for. Every time I make a pair of fangs, it's as intimate as getting a tattoo. And I call it the rite of the mirror, because I have a whole ceremony when I make the teeth. And at the end of the ceremony, the customer gets a mirror, and they can look in the mirror, and we call it the rite of the mirror. And the response that they give is incredible. They're so diverse. Some people growl, some people snarl, some people jump up and down, some people cry, some people laugh. But what's very interesting is whether someone walks into a nightclub and sees me doing a pair of fangs, like I met this girl from Rita from Sweden. I went to a music festival, and she got her fangs. She'd never heard of it before. She saw me doing it, and within 15 minutes, she was in the clan. It was that spontaneous for her, and she's one of our most loyal members and has been around for 6 years. I mean, it would just hit her, boom. Some people come in for Halloween, and they get the fangs, and it's not just a Halloween thing for them, but that's when they have the courage to come do it. Some people have been waiting for years. I've had my favorite story was of a young man named Miguel, and I call this the vampire and the violin. You want to hear this?
Sure.
Okay, this is the most incredible story I've had of all my fang customers. Miguel was a 16-year-old young man in Rio de Janeiro, and he had 3 dreams in life: to go to university, to play the violin, and get his fangs by Father Sebastiaan. These were his 3 dreams. And the first thing he did was he realized that getting fangs from Father Sebastiaan was going to be impossible, because Father Sebastiaan's in Paris, and he's a kid from the, not a well-off family in Rio. And not a well-off family in Brazil is very different from a not a well-off family in America. So one night, universities are free. So the first thing he put on his list to go to university. This is his first priority. And at 16, you have to take the entrance exams to get into university. And rich kids can do it, but all universities are free in Brazil. You just have to pass the exams. And like how we have Kaplan in the U.S. or whatever, he couldn't afford to do it. He couldn't take the exams to get his entrance exams, which are basically similar to SATs.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he couldn't afford to play a violin because he couldn't afford a violin. So one night he's on the bus going home, and his mother made sure that she lived in an affordable, clean neighborhood, but it just happened to be completely outside the metro of Rio, in the furthest area outside of the center you could imagine. He's on this bus, and he notices there's a black bag under a seat. And he's looking at this bag, and he's like, huh. And he rides the bus all the way to the end of the line, where his mom lives. He gets under the seat because he kind of hides, and he lets everybody get off the bus. And he goes up after the lights go out. And in bus parking lots, when they store the buses, they leave the doors open. Yeah, because, I don't think buses have keys. I think they have buttons. And what happened is he goes and he sneaks over and he looks in the bag, takes his mobile phone out and looks in the bag. And what he finds, amazingly, is $2,000 US. Now, he knows if he gives the money to the police, it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. Okay? He'll give it to the police, they'll keep the money. That's how, I guess, countries like Brazil. I'm not knocking cops, but that's what he told me what would happen. So then what he does is he takes the money. He gives his mother $200. He gives his sister $200. He takes $500 and he goes through the entrance exams of the university, okay, and passes them with flying colors. He buys himself a violin, and he puts some of the money away in emergency savings. Very, very smart. But obviously $2,000 is not enough or worth it over going to university to fly to Paris and get fangs from Father Sebastiaan.
Right.
The airfare alone probably from Brazil. Well, Miguel goes to school, and he meets a professor, and he forms a bond with this professor named Peter from Australia. And Peter is all curious about Miguel's love of vampires. Couldn't figure out what's going on. Now, Miguel has a lot of secrets which I can't share with you, but he's brilliant. So I get an email from him, and this is where I catch up with the story. He gets his fangs, and Peter sponsored him as an intern and brought him to Europe to go on work for Habitat for Humanity, and they stopped by Paris, and he gets his fangs from Father Sebastiaan when he was 19.
How cool.
And you want to talk about a buildup of energy. And he achieved his dream, and he's 19. The kid is incredible. He's brilliant. He's a photographer. He's just a wonderful guy. I mean, he's 19-year-old. He's 21 now. But that story just really touched me. And when I met him, we ended up hanging out. I mean, like, I don't normally hang out with my Fang clients all the time. After I made his Fangs, he was so interesting. We ended up spending 3 days together walking around Paris, talking philosophy and art and culture, going to museums, sitting by the river, having a glass of wine. I mean, incredible guy. And very,
and
very
19.
Well, yeah. Blew my mind. And I talk to him all the time. So we have a secret section of VampireAlmanac.com called the Sanguinarium, which is specifically for my Fang customers. And it's very interesting because there's a current of energy that flows through all of them. They all are extremely diverse people, but they each have their own personality and spirit. No matter what country you go to, when I make them Fangs, it's an exchange of energy. And I've noticed all of these common characteristics amongst my customers. And I call this flow of energy, this commonality, this agreement, this like kind of like team spirit in a way. I call it the current. And it's kind of like a spiritual blood in a way. And what's very interesting is when you get, I did an experiment in Prague last spring, and I got 15 of my clients together from around Europe. And I'll tell you, they've never met each other, but they're all Facebook friends now, still, and they're traveling together, and they're meeting friends like they were in a fraternity in the university. And that spirit is just something that gives me so much great pleasure about making teeth. But occasionally, one of my Fang customers shows potential. When they get their Fangs, something happens in them. It's already something that's buried deep inside of them, but something wakes up. I call it a dragon. It's not a real dragon, but it's a metaphor for a higher self. And something primal awakens. And what I did was, over 10 years, I researched over 1,000 of my customers, asking them the questions and keeping notes on a survey. And the result was basically 99 virtues that are this like personality template for my Fang clients, which I call the red veils. And I put this in a book. And what's interesting is every time I make a pair of Fangs, I give a copy of this book to a customer. Okay. And when they read the book, they're like, oh my God, it's me. And it makes me laugh because it's based on people just like them. And the kind of person that's attracted to me that gets Fangs is very specific. And they multiply.
But, you know, I think that that's true working as a healer or as a psychic. You know, some people are drawn to you, other people are not. And once you make that connection with them, it's like you're friends for life kind of thing.
Absolutely.
You know, because even in that kind of a session, there's definitely this energy exchange happening between you and that other person.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to go back to my basic questions. You know, one of the things that most people think, you know, when they think about vampires is, you know, like Count Dracula or, you know, Tom Cruise Interview with the Vampire, you know, or more recently the Twilight series. You know, and so based on the presentations that are given on TV or in the movies, I mean, is there any truth to that whole idea that they present?
Let's look at the psychological perspective of it. Yes, there is truth to everything. Every experience is real, from a dream to a physical world, because you experienced it. It can't not be real. However, what is the tangibility of it? How solid and effective is that reality? Now, I've never met anybody who actually thinks that Edward is a real person or Edward from Twilight is a real guy. Everybody knows there's a very big distinction between fantasy and reality. However, let's go back to Anne Rice's stuff. A lot of people think that Lestat, I've met people that believe Lestat is real, that Lestat is a real person. And Anne Rice's Vampires she was chosen to write the story of this real vampire, when in fact we know that Lestat is fiction. So depending on the perspective, the twist of reality, many people believe in vampires as real beings. But do I believe that there's Lestat, you know, running around physically at 300 years old and drinking blood and flying around and meeting Akasha? No, I don't. But the believability of each myth is very, very intriguing to watch people's reactions.
So no living dead, no.
You watch the rainbow and you see zombies like that. Do I believe in undead? No, I don't believe in undead. Do I know undead exist? Absolutely.
Okay, explain that comment.
Death. Humans believe there's a guarantee, most humans, except atheists, believe there's a guarantee of life after death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't agree. I think that energy is, just like your physical body is recycled, your entire, who you are is recycled. When I meet people that tell me about reincarnation, that they've had all these past lives, I'm like, dude, that's not your memories. That's someone else's memories. You got to look at it like that, because you, the person, the self, is the seat of your consciousness, and it's defined by your experiences. When you go through life, you evolve and go. You're on a course, just like a ship sailing to a destination. And when you die, all that energy is released, and it's recycled. It's like taking a cup of water and putting it back into the ocean. That's not you anymore. That energy is put in other people. I mean, that energy, energy is never destroyed. It's only transformed. You are a collection of energy, and then when that energy when death is the release of that energy. So you have the first death of the physical body, and then the second death of the self. And when the second death occurs, that personality is basically recycled. So it's I kind of equate it best to Alzheimer's disease. Reincarnation is Alzheimer's disease. It's one of the most horrible things that a soul could go through, in my opinion, especially people who love life and like being who they are. Religions make up all these excuses for death. It's natural. I get bored if I live forever. They come up with all these excuses. But when they go through reincarnation, they're being wiped. It's like a hard drive that you take a magnet and throw it over there. I mean, it's no longer the same person. It's the old story of, Total Recall is Arnold Schwarzenegger or Colin Farrell now the same guy because he's been reprogrammed with a new personality? No, you are you. You are your personality. You are yourself. You are made up of all of your experiences and dreams and ambitions, and you're going to forget everybody you love. And when you have reincarnation, it's a disease. It's like Alzheimer's. It's the same effect as Alzheimer's disease. You start over. And for a vampire, that's just not cool. I mean, wants to continue the self. They want to remember who they loved. They want to remember all the hard work that they've done. They want to remember and recall all the lessons of life. They want to love life, and a vampire adores life. So one of the principal elements of vampire philosophy, specifically in my clan, is to defeat death. And it's not completely possible physically because science hasn't gotten there yet, but is it possible spiritually? And that's one of the things that we explore. And it's not just living forever. It's living a great, wonderful life forever, a vital life, a healthy life, a life of strong development of the character and continuation of the self. So defeating death, and in fact, reincarnation is the enemy of vampirism. And so,
but my view of reincarnation is that when you die, this little, I'm going to call it like a little energy packet of who you are, transcends the body, and then that energy packet has the opportunity to take on a new physical form. Not that, all of your little, spirit molecules just kind of get thrown back into the spiritual pit potential of a new being. So I'm going to have to think on that one a little bit.
The problem that vampires have with that perspective is there's no evidence of it. There's no proof. There's no way to prove it. When we look at things, we start with the dayside perspective in our philosophy, which is dealing with reality, the five senses. Like, how Christian scientists will say, oh, let's worry about faith and healing Christian or a sick child, and refuses the child medical care. Well, the vampire says, why don't we do both? Why don't we have faith and why don't we have the doctor? Because it's going to improve our odds of getting better. And that's using a spiritual side, which we call the night side, and the philosophical side, and the real side, the day side, and having both of those options. Now, if we can't validate something and we have no solid evidence that, Brian over here Brian, his past life, he was a different person in those lives. I love the idea of starting over and having a fresh start, but you lose everything. And do I think I have past lives? Absolutely not. Do I think I have recalled memories of people that were from the Akashic records that my brain is tapped into while I dream and I was a child? Sure. I think that, that's how you get 1,000 people thinking they were Napoleon. Napoleon was a big personality.
Cleopatra, too.
What's that?
Cleopatra.
Both Cleopatra and Napoleon the guys, or vice versa, depending on the person. And, when people come to me and they tell me that they have these past lives, like, I have past life memories. I know exactly what they are. I remember I have a past life memory of a black woman being tortured in Louisiana in 1820, and then having to go take care of the children after that. I have a vivid memory of this, but I don't have a whole life. I just have that one memory and maybe a little bit of time around it. And past life recall, in my opinion, pulls other dead people's memories into the person's subconsciousness, because we're all connected subconsciously. We're all one big terminals on one big internet. And those memories kind of get picked up by babies when they dream. But I believe when a human dies, they're dead. They're gone. It's not the same person anymore. That energy's recycled, but that person is over. Just like if you have clones, it's the same thing of a clone. It's the same.
Even the idea that, there's not reincarnation, but you're just tapping into the Akashic record, is not really something that can be proven either, which leaves it in the realm of spirit and belief for everybody.
Absolutely. However, what makes more sense? Something that's validatable and provable, or something that is a theory? The night side of vampirism is completely improvable things. You cannot prove them. You need to put a side out, and you got to see things for what they are. But having a solid foundation in reality lets you, when you go into the night side, have a better perspective and be able to better determine what's real and fantasy. And that's why we encourage vampires to have a solid day side before they even deal with any spiritual stuff or esotericism. A lot of our members will come in and go into our inner circles, which deal with all of these things. And we have a specific order within Clan Sabretooth that deals with the spiritual elements. We even have a priesthood, but it's not directly part of the main clan. It's only select members that choose to do that. And we do experiments. We do bilocation experiments. We do a lot of psychic awareness, development. We work with reality manipulation. And we look at it on one side as marketing, because it's the same thing, and the other side is the spiritual level. But when it comes to reincarnation, and when people sit there and they tell me that they've had all these past lives, all I have to simply do is challenge that perspective. And when I tell reincarnation is akin to Alzheimer's disease, I ask them first, have you ever met someone that has Alzheimer's disease? It's the same soul. It's the same body, but it's not the same person, especially in progressive stages. And my ex-wife's grandmother had Alzheimer's, very bad. And I watched the progress of it. And it was the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. And it reinforced my faith in being a vampire, that I don't want to be like that. Mm-hmm. I would rather die and cease to exist than go through that degradation of who I am. So the only other option is to defeat it and keep going and never surrender, never give up, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of stuff. So this vampire's perspective, and this honestly is what differentiates the personality of a vampire from the average individual, even other spiritualities. This is a very specific trait that I've noticed amongst vampires, that they have this love of life, this desire to continue it and to preserve who they are on a continual basis for as long as possible in a vital and healthy way. And you might be surprised, but a lot of members of Clan Sabretooth are highly in sports, and I made fangs for a captain of a sail ship the other day. We have members of I've made fangs for celebrities, politicians, all of this, and we're a fraternity, we're a tribe, and we're very different from other traditions of vampirism, and not all traditions of vampirism believe in what we believe in. So it's a very interesting thing to see how our path of vampirism is, and how we don't expect other people to believe us. We don't need that. We don't have to justify ourselves or give any, precedence to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
We know what we know, and we agree on that. And if you agree on something else, cool. Let's go have a beer.
The teeth that you make, the fangs that you make, it sounds like they must be removable. Like they're not a permanent, like, cap that people get put on.
No. Because, one thing about saber-tooth vampires is we're so diverse, and the majority of us, not all of us are out of the coffin. So we need to be able to go to work and have a job and have families and really fit into reality. So something permanent like that would not make you easily adjustable to society. And if you have permanent fangs, the only result is people look at you weird. However, if you put them on one afternoon while you're at work and they're so subtle and people don't realize, and then they go, what the hell? I have a friend that runs a bio supermarket in Germany, and she wears her fangs to work, and her customers love it. But that probably wouldn't go down in a little village in France, southern neighborhood in Tennessee,
Yeah. Working at Walmart, probably not so much. Okay, so probably another question that my listeners and I definitely have is the whole idea of blood drinking. I mean, do people really drink blood? And is that a major focus in the vampire community, or is that just kind of hyped up?
All of your questions have a little bit righteous answers to them. It is hyped up. There are people that do it, and it is a part of the vampire community. It's not something I practice. I used to practice it. In Sabertooth and the Sanguinarium, we don't condone, endorse, or permit it to be something as part of our community. There are groups of vampires that practice this. There are individuals that practice this. They're known as sanguinarian vampires, not to be confused with the Sanguinarium, which is our inner community, because it means to drink blood. So there are people who firmly are convinced that they need to drink blood for their health. Now, there's no scientific evidence that proves they need to do this. There's no psychological study that proves they need to do this, but they are convinced it's part of what they need to do. I'll respect that. We don't allow it to be done in our clubs, within the clan's events. Part of our membership is not permitted to do that because it's considered something that is not a part of our tradition. And we keep an open mind. I have friends that are blood drinkers, but they're not a part of my clan. That's one of the things that is part of the initiation is you don't do that. And if you want to be a fan customer, make someone's teeth, but you got to realize how dangerous it is. It's really, really dangerous. And it's not like the body needs you to drink blood. Now, a lot of people come to me and they say, oh, I need to drink blood. I'm like, oh, you have porphyria, which is a disease that forces someone to have a blood craving. And they go, no, I don't have porphyria. I need to drink blood. I'm like, well, there's 40 or 50 people in the world that have porphyria. It's a horrible disease, and I hope you never get it. And they're like, well, I need to drink blood. I'm like, okay, I hope you do it safely, but please don't do it in my club or in my house. Okay, do your own thing. Okay, you can do that in your home, or just don't do it in front of me. I have no problem with you doing it, but it's like, if you're a faithful Jew, you can have friends that eat ham, but you just don't eat ham. Mm-hmm. Or you're a vegan and you just don't want to eat steak. I don't have any problem people doing what they want to do, but just don't bring a steak into my house. I love steak, by the way. I'm just using that as a metaphor.
You like it really rare, too. No, just kidding. How many, and this is, I'm just asking for kind of a ballpark number, but how many different clans or groups would you say there are? Different traditions?
Well, there's three main traditions. There's living vampires, which I am, and there's different groups within that community. There's psychic vampires, which is not really a clan-based system. It's more of a, people consider it an energy deficiency.
And we're going to come back to that whole topic.
Oh, good.
The psychic vampire part.
But there's really few organized clans or traditions of blood drinkers and psychic vampires. But I would say there's maybe of covens, for example, covens are known as households, and they're usually up to like 20, below 20 people, like a traditional Wiccan or pagan coven. Then there's Clan Sabretooth, which is the largest group, which is the one where I'm a part of and the founder of. And I can't really tell you how many members we have because that's a highly guarded secret. And then there's other groups like the TOV, which is the Temple of the Vampire, and the Order of the Vampire, which is the original first group that I know that was organized and is still active to this day. And they're a member of the Temple of Set, which is a breakoff of the Church of Satan. So organized groups, that's that. And they're mostly living vampires like me, although I'm not a Satanist. Like esoteric traditions are mostly living vampires. Well, psychic vampires, there's a few groups. There's lots of houses and groups and covens, but they're usually small, like 2 or 3, 4, maybe 10 people at the most, and they come and go like the wind. It'd be really amazing. You'd be surprised. I get an email from we have a household in Denmark, and then we have a branch in Brazil, and then the next thing I know, their website's gone, and I never hear from them again for 10 years, and then they pop up, and they're like, hi. So the scene's consistently changing. The community is evolving and changing all the time, or one person breaks off one group. But Sabretooth has been solid and structured since 1995.
Based on your knowledge, how far back does the vampire tradition go? I mean, are we really talking about a history that goes back to, Dracul? Not that I'm giving him credit for the whole vampire thing, but I mean, does the tradition go really that far back in time and move forward to the current day, or is it something that really is a little bit more modern?
The vampire scene is modern. As a culture of people being open and out of the coffin is completely modern. I mean, 15 years ago, if you said you were a vampire, people would look at you crazy. Today we have vampires on Tyra Banks and on TV, but it's still a fringe community. And,
but we like fringe.
Oh, sure. When you asked about houses and clans and groups, the problem is that structure worked great when there was no internet. And when the internet came about, the need for households or small groups that are geographically based became completely irrelevant, in my opinion. There's no point because you can get on a forum and talk to other people about the same subject, or be on Facebook and join a group on Facebook. And most of the vampire community really developed itself when it was with the internet. Before the internet, it was a bunch of zines and a couple people, and Vampire the Masquerade games were a very popular thing before the internet really came to be in the late 90s. So the whole vampire culture really is an internet culture. And before that, you would go to a golf club or a newsletter or a zine, and that was the only way to network. And I was around for the prime of that in the early 90s is when the vampire scene really started getting its foundations. And then as the internet was born, information could flow through, and basically the three distinctions of vampire, psychic, sanguinary, and living vampire all came to kind of a solid head and definition. And it's kind of defined itself over the last 10 years that way. But it goes back in time, and I could tell you 100 stories, but I don't know if you believe it.
Well, share your favorite one.
My favorite story,
or the weirdest one, or
this one. Vampires have always been with us. It's not something, psychic vampires have been around forever. I mean, that's just there's a bunch of causes for that. Then that's not something that's like a true vampire in the way of immortal and living forever and stuff. I mean, psychic vampires and living vampires feed in a similar process, but they're very different reasons for feeding. The technique of feeding is similar. However, the ethics and the need to do it, the need is different.
Ooh, that's an interesting topic. We're going to come back to that one because I definitely want to talk about psychic vampires. Working in the paranormal world, working in the psychic energy world. That term is thrown out a lot, and I want to explore that. But I forget what the original question was. Do you remember?
There's so much to talk about. Let's get on to another question.
Okay, so let's just go on to the whole concept of psychic vampires. In the psychic world, there are those people that, are your friends, and you talk to them on the phone, or, they're your quote-unquote friends, and you talk to them on the phone, and by the time you get off the phone, you just want to go take a nap because all of your energy has been drained. And I think everyone has had that experience of, those people in their lives that just kind of suck them dry. And I think there's been more conversation awareness about, that is kind of, or at least, from my understanding, a psychic vampire. So from your community, would we be talking about the same thing?
Yes. This is a very, very important and controversial subject. In the clan of Sabretooth, it's not an issue. Okay? Psychic vampires are exactly what you described them to be. However, there's a movement of psychic vampires who are self-aware of what they are. They realize they do this to people, and they're trying to manage it. And it's a very, very different thing from what I am. Living vampires work with energy, and they feed off energy. But there's an entire ethical system to it. Psychic vampires are very common. What you're talking about is what we call a traditional, unawakened psychic vampire, or a Sci-Vamp. However, in the late 90s, Sci-Vamps have started their own community, the psychic vampire community, which is separate from my community. They're not a part of the Sanguinimon. They're their own thing. And it's kind of a self-help. It's like, hi, my name is Brian, and I'm a psychic vampire. Hi, Brian, how you doing? Wow. Okay, that's not the Sabretooth way of vampirism. That's psychic vampirism. And they become a self-help. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's equivalent to AA. And they're energy addicts, or they're real psychic vampires, but they're doing something about it. They're making a progressive movement to try to fix what they are. And that, I think, has a certain sense. I can give some kudos to that, definitely. But they're the ones out there saying that they're vampires. And they look at me and they tell me I'm not a real vampire. And I'm like, dude, all right, whatever you want to think. Okay, go ahead. But
with the people that I've encountered that I would consider a psychic vampire, and I really appreciate, the commentary that there are people that are actually trying to move out of that mindset, but there's usually this whole negative, self-defeated, loathsome, they just have this whole mental thing where, I don't know if that's what they use to lure you in so that they can suck your energy. I mean, I don't really understand that whole, I'll use your word, feeding thing. But it just seems like if they are, going to their little, AA meetings, that maybe they realize that maybe it's not such a good thing.
They do. They're very victim-minded. That's very popular today. To be whatever emo culture or whatever culture you want to talk to. Oh, woe is me. I'm so sad, and it's kind of challenging for me because I'm sitting here hanging out with members of royalty in Europe, okay, aristocrats aristocrats and making fangs and having all these crazy adventures. And when I meet a traditional Sci-Vamp, which is the one you described, who doesn't realize what they are, I avoid them. But so many of them come to me, and they automatically assume I can help them. And I'm like, guys, I'm not a Sci-Vamp. I can't help you. And they get like almost offended that I won't spend my time for that. And that's not what I do. I'm not a psychic vampire psychologist. And I have no time for that. I mean, that's not my job. And my job is to make fangs and collect people that are of agreement with my perspective on vampirism. And I'm not stopping or trying to force anybody not to do what they do, but it's just not my thing. And it's really interesting because they try to feed off me. I've seen them try to do it. And we used to actually be involved with, the whole vampire community used to be one solid group. And ever since the last 7 years, we've really disassociated from, we've gone more internal and kind of focused on our own community. And the ridiculous amount of success that we've had has been incredible. But every time I set foot into the psychic vampire community, I just feel like I've got hundreds of them around me, and it's like, even if you think about them, you get connected to it, and it drains you. And you look at a lot of their forums and their news groups, and it's like, really, I just have no interest in being a part of that community. I want to be around vibrant, amazing, and incredible people that love vampires.
I can't even imagine how a whole group of them could get together because there wouldn't be anybody to feed off of.
They feed off each other, believe it or not. You look at some of their...
It's like, here, I'll get your low-energy mojo to feed my low-energy mojo that's going to feed that low-energy mojo.
I can't partake in that community. I try. I've tried to help them. I've tried to be a part of it, but they see me as... They don't agree with me, and they consistently think that I'm doing a disservice to them by doing what I do. And I'm not. I'm just doing my thing. I want to be left alone and focus inward on Clan Sabretooth and my projects. Like Vampyre Almanac, you won't see anything about psychic vampires in Vampyre Almanac unless it's, how to improve the person. The Vampyre Almanac is specifically about living vampirism. And that's very important to me, that there's a place for living vampires to project to the public, because most living vampire groups are very private. And I want to be able to bring things like, fashion techniques, using the glamour of the vampire imagery. I mean, the Hollywood has, in the last 8 years, has spent $7 billion on vampire movies and made over $10 billion. I mean, it's incredible. And we don't think there's anything wrong with that. Well, a lot of the psychic vampires get really upset about it, and they think that they're being mocked. And we're like, yeah, let's freaking bring another Dracula movie out. It's cool, but we know the difference between fantasy and reality. We know that, in Clan Sabretooth, it's a philosophy for us. It's a metaphor. It's very powerful. So the psychic vampire community, it's its own thing. It's, we call it the other vampire community, OVC, in regards to inside of the Sabretooth clan. And,
Well, and I'm trying to understand kind of the psychology behind the psychic vampire stuff. It's like, okay, so if they're aware that they have this behavior, I guess would be the correct word to use, then I think it's interesting that they would go out, or find a willing participant that would just be willing to let them suck their energy dry.
That is known as the ethical psychic vampire. Okay. Which in Sabretooth, we call them ethical psychic vampires. And an ethical psychic vampire is someone who is fully aware that with their condition, and they work with people, and they have consenting donors. And they do meditations, and they learn how to feed in a certain way that doesn't harm anyone. So, but they still, no matter what, they're a psychic vampire. It's like the old Toad and Frog story. In the end of the day, they're still a psychic vampire. And they just, that's their nature. And they're not, the best article that I've ever read on psychic vampires okay, was in the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. And it's an article, a chapter called Not All Vampires Drink Blood. And what you're describing is exactly what he describes. It's the best, most concise article. And it's not only just people that can be psychic vampires. It's charity groups, it's corporations, it's cultures can become. Psychic vampirism is a disease. It's a condition, and it's a negative thing. And I give strong respect to psychic vampires that try to recover from what they're doing or manage their situation. And I think that's awesome that they're self-aware. And they call that the awakening, which actually a lot of their terminology comes from the Sabretooth clan, which has nothing to do with psychic vampirism. You know, they use a lot of our terms and a lot of terms that we don't use anymore, like house. We don't have clans or groups or covens inside. There's just Sabretooth and that's it. And they use a lot of the things that have started within the Sabretooth community because we're very innovative and creative. So they kind of copy a lot of what we do. It's very, very flattering in a way, but it then to the public blurs what we are and they are. Mm-hmm. And they also feel that they are vampires and we're not vampires. So it's kind of like a big conflict of interest.
Well, I mean, they kind of are vampires, you know, because trust me, I've had so many of the psychic vampires, like, in my life until I finally figured out what was going on. And it's just like, you know what? I don't need this anymore. But how would somebody recognize if they were being victimized by a psychic vampire?
The first thing that you need to realize is that if you get into conversations with them, and you can never have an ending to the conversation. For example, you're having a debate, and you can never win the debate because they simply don't get it. They're playing dumb in a way. And when you're in this debate, and this endless debate of conversation, the only way you can't win, and you know what they're doing is they're just keeping you in the conversation is just to pull your energy. It's a way of making contact with you. And the only way to break contact with them, to defend yourself, is to avoid them at all costs. Just simply stop. Don't feed them anymore. It's like a high school drama. That's a psychic vampire behavior in a way. You know, the more you feed it, the more that they're going to respond, and the more links they're going to create, and the more energy they're going to drain off you. Psychic vampirism is very different, in my opinion, from living vampirism, because psychic vampirism is not about a life force deficiency, in my opinion, as much as it is about an emotional deficiency. And they need to feed their emotions.
So I'm going to tell you about this girlfriend of mine, and hopefully she never listens to this show. And so she would call me up. I would be at work or wherever I would be, and she would call me up, and the mistake question was, "How are you?"
Okay.
Big mistake. Well, I got up and I really had these cramps, and then I mean, it would go on for an hour, maybe two. And she started dating this guy who I love to death, and we got in a conversation about talking to her on the phone. He goes, "Yeah, you know, I'll put the phone down, go wash the dishes, come back, go, put the phone down, go do this other stuff." And she would go on and be so unaware that there was actually somebody on the other end of the line. I mean, I would do all kinds of stuff while she would just go on and on and on and on and on.
Sure. That's completely, you know, I talk a lot, but I'm also a very outgoing person, but that has nothing to do with psychic vampirism. And conversation is a way of connecting energy, you know, and the subtle reality of spiritual. I mean, it's an exchange of energy. So psychic vampires, even if they're projecting the energy in the conversation towards you, they're actually in a way draining you by connecting links and emotional links. And you have to sit there and be obedient to their lecture, and the response is that you're being drained. For example, one of the most obvious cases of psychic vampirism was my grandmother. I mean, the lady had an incredible life. I mean, but nothing was perfect. Nothing would work for her. I mean, she lived in a beautiful home. She had an amazingly loving husband, but she would just complain and be angry about everything and talk about things that happened 40 years ago. And I learned how to shield against psychic vampires emotionally because of her. She was one of the worst cases I've ever seen.
Oh, you didn't know my girlfriend.
Okay.
They could have went, toe-to-toe whining at each other.
Yeah, but what she's doing is a classic case of psychic vampirism at a conversation level. And the only way to avoid it is to hang up on her or avoid her.
I mean, what other ways do they try to connect with people to feed? I mean, because I think that it's a problem that is a lot larger than many people are aware, and so that's why I just really want to spend some time, even though we're going to go to a commercial break in a couple of minutes, giving people some awareness so that they can, know when their energy is being drained.
Well, first, they're going to feel it. Okay, you got to recognize a psychic vampire for what they are, and that's an emotional addict. They need emotion. They're addicted to having emotion and creating drama. They'll create drama. They'll create stress. They'll make you feel responsible for them. It's a very powerful psychic vampire technique. They'll just keep, like I said, they'll just keep you in a conversation and you'll never be able to win. Like I go on in the psychic vampire community and these people debate about things like they know they're the authority on vampires, and I'm like, guys, you're one type of vampire. There's other types of vampires. No, we're the only real type of vampire. And I'm like, whatever, do your thing. But I mean, I've been a target of that community for quite a while, and I'm not going to be a victim of it. I'm not going to be drained by them. And I know how to defend myself. And Dionne Fortune wrote some great literature on her book, Psychic Self-Defense, about psychic vampires. But if you want to defend yourself, the most efficient way is to simply avoid the person. Cut them out of your life. Avoid them. Minimize your contact with them. It's the only real option. And I've tried every technique, and that's the most efficient way.
I mean, that's kind of sad. I mean, I, teach, energy work and energy protection, and you can defend yourself for, limited periods of time by just, really strengthening your aura and putting up shields and blah, blah, blah. But it really takes a lot of energy to keep that level of protection up if you're in and around that person a lot.
You have to avoid them. That's
Mm-hmm.
the solution that I've discovered after being in the vampire scene for almost 20 years. That is the only solution. You just don't respond to them. You ignore them. It's like your little brother coming up to beat you up. You put your hand on his forehead and he keeps swinging. There's nothing they can do. But eventually that's going to take energy. You have to walk away. It's like a fight. Okay? You avoid the psychic vampire at all costs. You don't respond to them. You don't give them energy. You don't acknowledge them. You simply ignore them. And that technique is the only solution that I've discovered.
It just makes you sad, even though this is what they want anyway, that that's the only way of dealing with individuals with that kind of energy, because then it just adds to their whole everybody hates me, nobody likes me, so now I need to go call somebody else to go suck some energy from.
Psyvamp is not going to kill you. They're not going to hurt you. Okay, they're just going to cause you stress and make you feel drained. They can't physically kill you or drain you to death. It's not possible. They just make you, it's like, will a parasite, maybe if I've seen people that go cuckoo after a while. I've seen people in these codependent relationships, where their husband or wife is a psychic vampire. But most Psyvamps are just simply annoying. They're not traditional Psyvamps, not the ethical Psyvamps. Let me make a very clear distinction on that. But most traditional Psyvamps are simply just annoying pests. And you just avoid them. I mean, if there's someone in your workplace or someone, you'll find them at work, you'll find them in your family, you'll find them here or there. I know it's not possible all the time, but simply to defend yourself is simply to avoid them.
And it sucks if it's your sister or your grandmother or something like that. But, Sebastiaan, we need to go to a break. So when we come back, why don't we talk about – actually, the question I'd like to start with is, why be a vampire in the first place? But the music's going to be coming up, and there it is. Anyway, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. You're listening to Just Energy Radio. We're talking to Sebastiaan von Houten about vampires. His webpage is FatherSebastiaan.com. His book is Vampire Virtues, and we'll be back with Father Sebastiaan after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.